Today, we're going to talk about an absolute scumbag of a buyer on eBay who scammed a seller, or tried to scam a seller, I should say, out of a very expensive Pokemon card. I want to talk about this because I have some tips that you guys can use if you are in fact selling cards to avoid this from happening, because I've seen this happen, a lot over the years, and sometimes the seller gets scammed because eBay are very lazy when it comes to their automated reporting and monitoring of situations like this. So I'll talk about that. I'll give you some tips and tricks and background of what actually went down. And then I'll sort of share something from a different perspective, i.e. what are some things you can do when you're buying on eBay on how to sort of avoid getting scammed, one of which is via shill bidding. So I'll talk about some tips and tricks on how you can sort of monitor shill bidding a little bit more easily. Now, we'll kick things off, like I said, with this seller who got almost scammed out of a very expensive Umbreon EX, a very expensive Pokemon card. And what's interesting about this is the person that was selling the card is actually fairly prominent when it comes to social media here in Australia. They do sketches and skits, very similar to the old Vine culture. You might know him, you may have seen him. He's got 400,000 subscribers on YouTube, but it is Shaq TV. And he put out a post essentially saying he was getting scammed by Mr. Bunny Hunter on Instagram, and that was the name of the eBay account as well. Now, if I remember correctly, he hit this Umbreon EX in a break. It's about a $1,500 Australian card, and then decided to sell it to try and cash in and get some money. And then what transpired was him shipping it, sold it via eBay, customer gets it, buyer gets it, and they come out and say, you know what, it's fake. They send some photos that are highly questionable, and that's sort of where this scam started to unravel. Now, he quickly noticed that the photos that the buyer was sharing was not the same card that he sold, which is a huge red flag straight away and a huge, win for him as a seller, because usually buyers, when they try and run this scam, are a little bit more clever than that. But he came out, named and shamed the individual. Turns out this individual was known for doing this kind of scam in and around the hobby here in Australia. So that helped with some of his case with eBay. But one of those ones that people often don't push back in the right way when they are a seller like this on eBay and they get scammed. And that's sort of where my tips and tricks come in. Fundamentally, the first one is making sure that your photos that you're taking of the card itself are very clear, so that, if a buyer comes in and says, hey, the card you sent me is not actually the card, you've got a really good comparison that can be used to say, hey, you know what, that's not the card, right? But that card that you're saying that you bought from me is not the card that I sold you. It's not the card from the listing. And obviously we'll go ahead from there. Now, this is the card in question that he hit in a break, if I remember correctly. This is the individual from Shaq TV. I don't remember his name, unfortunately. This is the listing. And then pretty quickly, you're going to see a Photoshop on the screen that shows what the card looks like that the buyer said they received. Now, obviously what's happened in the past, buyers have actually been scammed like this before, where you've got sellers sending something different. So, you might say, hey, maybe the buyer was actually getting scammed in this particular instance, but no, like I said, you're going to see in a second, the photos that the buyer actually goes ahead and shares is not, the same quality of the card, and it's not the same card at all. And the individual from Shaq TV, again, I apologize, I forget what his name is, but there's some things that he mentioned that I think a lot of sellers need to be doing in the past. This guy sends photos that he's bought and he says, you know what, this is not the card you sold me. Me as a seller in that particular instance, the second tip that goes back to the first is, use those really good photos you took in the first place, and then, ask the buyer to take, photos from the same angle, right? You've got a photo of your card flat on the table, ask them to take the same style of photo, because that's going to allow you to sort of say, hey, do the back of the cards actually line up? Do the front of the cards line up? Is the centering the same? Is there damage on the card that I sold you that's now not on the card that you're showing me? Is there more damage on the card that you're showing me versus what I actually sold you? And I've sort of had people do this to me before, and they try and be dodgy. And what I've done is I've got those two photos, and then I've gone ahead and highlighted the differences between the two cards and gone back to eBay and said, hey, these are not the same thing. What the F is this buyer actually trying to do? And then very quickly, eBay would say, hey, you know what? We're going to resolve this. Now, the reason why this is important, and I can't recall if I said it already, is that eBay, as you guys will know, do a terrible job most of the time when it comes to resolution for stuff like this. They always predominantly side with the buyer. I shouldn't say always, but fundamentally they will side with the buyer. Now, in this particular instance, the buyers screwed themselves over because they sort of, gave the ammunition to eBay and to the seller that they were the ones doing the scam, which is obviously a good thing that it's happened. But given the fact that you got eBay often siding with buyers, you need to be really careful. And like I said, that's where the photos come in. That's where you sort of need to be proactive when buyers start sending you things or saying the card's fake. You need to be asking for photos. They need to be clear. You can't let them take them from random angles. You need to make sure they're aligned to the original listing. And in all honesty, if you're going ahead and selling a very, very expensive card, I would say cards over $500 for me would be considered very expensive. I'd be filming the packaging of it, right? If you're sort of not in a position where you can comfortably lose that $500, if a buyer successfully scams you, film the packaging of it, film the sealing of it, and and then film yourself taking it to the post office, or film yourself doing all that at the post office, right? And sure, you can still circumvent that. You can take the package back, open it and change it, blah, blah, blah. But things like that will help eBay understand that you're doing the right thing. And this is one of those ones where, it's really unfortunate the fact that this kind of scam is actually successful really often. But in this case, Shaq TV is getting the card back potentially, but he's definitely going to get the money, right? The buyer's not going to get to keep the card and get a refund. So that's awesome. He did a follow-up video talking about it in a little bit more detail, basically saying since he posted that first video where he called out the seller, he got the more info, or the buyer, sorry, he got more information that the guy's now closed his Instagram account. He's sort of disappeared off some of these Facebook groups. He found a bit more information about him from the card, the car community, not card community, of doing some shady things in the past as well. But one of those ones where we've got a happy ending here, but if you're in a position like this, make sure you're getting those photos, right? Too many people are too quick to sort of not ask or challenge in the right way, right? A buyer will complain, they won't say the right things when they're the seller, and then eBay's just going to immediately side with them. Have clear photos, ask for clear photos, make sure you're doing the comparison between the two cards to show that the damage aligns, the centering aligns. The good thing with Pokemon cards is they've got the swell on the back. You can make sure that they're all aligned in terms of the same positioning and the like. Sports cards might be a little bit more difficult, but if you're selling an autograph card or whatever it is, you can try and line the things up, right? Just be proactive because eBay is not going to do it for you. And a lot of this stuff would sound like common sense, but unfortunately, like I've said a bit earlier and multiple times now, people get burned by this time and time again. So be proactive and do what this guy did. Go on social media and complain. Try and go to some of these card community groups and see if anybody else knows this buyer that, is calling you out or trying to rip you off. Be proactive, rely on the community because the community is quite good. And we just need to sort of look after each other. So again, if this happens to you, follow what old mate did here, use those tips and tricks, and you should be fine. But unfortunately, eBay get it wrong a lot of the time, and I've seen time and time again, sellers get burned because buyers are absolute scumbags and pieces of shit. Now, I mentioned in the intro, I wanted to talk about something you can do from a buyer's perspective, from a bidder's perspective on eBay, a bit of a tip and trick around shill bidding. Now, I've referenced this before on the channel, but what's very interesting is that a lot of people don't know that this exists. And what's also very interesting is that it doesn't look like it's available to everybody within North America, within the US specifically, which is very, very odd. But I love to use this because it gives you a really good indication on whether or not shill bidding is actually going on with a particular consignor or seller on eBay. Now, we'll look at some Kobe's that are being sold in China and Macau as a good indicator for this because the sellers that I'm going to reference here often have shill bidding going them like crazy. They're notorious for having cards being shill bid. I want to talk about them because I think there's some good examples here. Now, I'm trying to pick up a Kobe on-card auto for my PC. That's why the Eminence cards are front of mind. I'm completely priced out of these things, but like I said, these are some pretty good examples. Now, what people will often do is they'll come to the listing itself, and this is one of those consigners that's notorious to have items shill bid. What they'll do is they'll click on the bids over here, which will open this window, this page, and they'll sort of inspect the bid history to see whether or not, there's anything interesting going on, right? Where there's any hanky-panky. And by that, I mean, is there any really low feedback bidders, like 0 feedback, 1 feedback, consistently bidding on this item, trying to push the price up? When they become the high bidder, they stop, and then they go ahead and push the price up even further. Or they'll see these and they'll come look over here to see whether or not any bids have been retracted, because this is also when bids will show to have been retracted, or when you'll also see potentially some private bidders listed here as well. So people will see all those things and essentially stop bidding or not bid on the item, or maybe don't push as hard to try and win it because, you don't know if that's all genuine, so you want to try and avoid it. It's too risky. Now, people see all that and they stop there. Now, the tip and trick I have for you here is that you can click on the bidder's name and you get some really good detailed information on that person's bid history for the last 30 days, in particular with how many times they've bid on items with this particular seller, which is very, very important, because what you'll see here often is there'll be people here that have really high feedback, and then you'll see the bid history and it looks very, very strange. And one of those things that people don't know exists, and for some reason, this is not available to everybody in the US. Now, what this does over here is it shows, all the different items this person has bid on within the last 30 days, when their last bid was, who the seller was, albeit it's de-identified, and then how many times they bid on each item. And what it does show is, because I clicked on this through that Kobe Eminence, it says they've bid twice on that particular item. They have 100% positive feedback. This is their name with how much feedback they've received, either as a buyer or a seller, whatever. The thing that's important, though, is this 30-day summary over here, because what this does show is the total bids they've made in the last 30 days, the number of items they've bid on, but most importantly, how many items they've bid on for this particular seller. So of all the bids they've placed, 18% relate to things being sold by this seller. That's very important to call out, because what often happens is you'll see this number be really, really high when somebody's doing some shady things with a shill bidding perspective. So you'll see this number be 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 plus %, all of which could not mean anything in of itself. But when you look at the bid activity, the number of bids they've placed, it's very, very questionable. More often than not, it does indicate that shill bidding is going on. And the next two lines are obviously very important as well. It shows bid retractions over the last 12 months, as well as in total within the last 30 days, which would also be an indicator, right? If you've seen, this number be really high in the last 30 days, that also maybe indicates, shill bidding going on, because how often do people genuinely retract a bid on eBay? It's very dodgy, in my opinion. It often speaks to shill bidding. But one of those things that you need to be clicking into this to actually see it for yourself, because when you're not, when you're trying to work out whether or not shill bidding is happening, you can't just use those things I mentioned earlier. You need to look at this number. Now, obviously, I should say, someone like me, right? I rarely bid on auctions, so I might bid on 1 or 2 auctions a month. So if you click on my eBay account and you look at my 30-day summary, you might see I've placed 2 bids in the month, and I might have bid on 1 item from a particular seller, which would mean that my bid activity with that seller would be 100%, right? Because I've not bid elsewhere. Apologies for my daughter going bananas in the background. So obviously when you see sort of small numbers like that, it sort of makes sense. But what happens more often than not, and when I've given examples like this in the past with these particular sellers from China, is you'll see the total bids will be in the hundreds, if not thousands. They'll have multiple items bid on, like 3 or 4 with that many bids, and the bid history will be like 100%. So if you're sort of bidding on that many items, like hundreds of items, you've bid thousands of times, and it's 80, 90% with one particular seller, that's honestly odd. And that should be looked at. And when you see that, you should think of shill bidding immediately and maybe stop bidding on that item altogether, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. So sort of use this as a bit of a superpower, because people don't know it exists, and it's honestly hilarious that they don't. And what's more hilarious about it is that eBay don't appear to make it available to everyone, which makes no freaking sense to me. This person here is the person who's coming second with that eminence that I showed a bit earlier. They've bid 9%, right? So you can see here they've placed 300 bids. They've bid on 220 items, but they've only got 9% bid activity with this seller. Now, what I've seen in the past, like I said a little bit earlier, you'll see these two numbers be the same, but the actual bid activity would be, 90%, which would be odd and a huge red flag straight away, because I can't think of too many examples where you're going to have that many items bid on from a particular seller that somebody genuinely would be trying to buy. Now, maybe it's a repacker, maybe it's somebody selling something that's really scarce and obscure, and you're a collector trying to chase it all. But that just seems like a red flag to me. So again, use that as your superpower. Use it when you see it, because that is a huge red flag. And then you should be also asking the question to eBay. Now, some people in the past have said eBay won't do shit. I've communicated with eBay here in Australia. Their chat functionality is really good. And I've actually got sellers banned and accounts banned because I've said, hey, I've looked at the bid history for these individuals. It looks very suspicious. Can you look into it? And then they've told me, yes, they've looked into it. They can see IPs are the same. Maybe they're pulling my leg, which might be true. Maybe they're just taking the piss. But what happened subsequently was those accounts were suspended. So maybe they were suspended because they didn't pay. That's what eBay chat told me. There's some other examples over here with some other cards. I've got this one over here listed by Probstein. You click into this one, which I believe is the same one. Again, click into it. You can see over here the person coming first. They've bid on this many items within the month, almost 500, which is insane. Maybe they're a repacker. But only 7% of those have been with Probstein. The person coming second, 71% of the items they've bid on are with Probstein. Like, that looks odd to me. When I see stuff like that, I'd say, hey, Probstein, did you take 49 cards? Because there's 49 items here. Did you take 49 cards from a particular person? And maybe it's somebody assigned to that consignment that's trying to push the price up. Use that to your advantage, guys. People don't know it exists. It's a huge red flag when you see stuff like that. Those bid activities, shouldn't be that high across that many items. Like the example I gave earlier, sure, 1 or 2, because you might be a normal person like me buying 1 or 2 cards every couple of months, and naturally your bid activity is going to be really high. But when you're seeing 70, 80, 90% and the person's bid on dozens and dozens of items, that's just a big red flag to me. Avoid those auctions unless you desperately need that card for your collection. Just use it to your advantage. Those are the tips and tricks you can use as a buyer. Like I said earlier, if you're a seller trying to avoid some scumbag buyers, make sure your photos are clear. Make sure you're asking for the buyer to give clear photos, and make sure you're communicating clearly with eBay. You're being proactive. You're not sending shitty messages to the buyer. You're doing all the right things, going to eBay with the detail. You're consolidating all the conversations, taking photos, and you're coming proactive with the information. You've got the images side by side after the buyer sent it to you. You've circled it up. You've made images or markups. Do all that sort of stuff, and eBay will take you very seriously, because more often than not, people don't do that, and eBay just like, you know what, fuck off. I'm just going to give the money to the buyer. So it is what it is. Thanks for watching, guys. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.